Welcome to Be Well for Life, and continuing in our series of healthy living classes. Today's presentation, we're going to be talking about maintaining a healthy weight. Let's start by taking a quick look at the overweight as the problem. Notice that every year in the United States, 375,000 people die prematurely due to excess body weight. That's a lot, isn't it? That's more than died from COVID in the big pandemic that we had here in the United States. Of course, overweight was one of the big risk factors for that too, wasn't it? So excess body weight does have a significant effect on a lot of things in our body. Notice in the United States, 2 out of 3 adults, that's 71%, exceed the healthy weight range. So if you're a little bit overweight, you're certainly in good company as far as numbers are concerned. Overweight is probably one of the most common or more prevalent health problems in the United States. And the prevalence of obesity, that's the second category of being overweight. That's where the risk, BMI of 30 and above, the risk goes up significantly. Is as many as 41 million people in that category now. And those people are significantly increased risk. So it's a big problem, isn't it? Obesity knocks about 20 years of good health off your life. And so to prevent that or to correct it if it's possible, certainly a big improvement in our health when we can do that. So the Journal of the American Medical Association put out an article about the benefits or the risks that occur from being overweight. And so if we are overweight, the risk for heart disease is significantly higher. The extra fat produces extra cholesterol, it puts an extra load on the heart, it makes the blood pressure higher and can damage the heart. It does the same thing to the brain, and so strokes are much higher. Type 2 diabetes is higher. The excess weight causes insulin resistance, and so more people die from diabetes that are overweight. Osteoarthritis, the excess weight puts a strain on the joints, and so arthritis is more common. And even in the brain, Alzheimer's disease, as a person who is overweight, has almost double the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And of course, the overall thing is then is total death mortality is much higher. So excess weight is a real problem. And as we take a look at this chart, overweight and disease risk from the New England Journal of Medicine, you can see that comparing in the blue people with a healthy BMI of 22 to people who are obese, a BMI of 30 and above, look at the relative risk differences in those different diseases. Notice it's about 2 or 3 times higher in the obese group for heart disease, isn't it? In blood pressure, rate of high blood pressure, again, about 3 times higher. Even gallbladder disease, about 3 times higher. But wow, look at that last one, diabetes. The risk for developing diabetes if you're obese is about 10 times higher. So excess body weight certainly affects our health in many ways. But let's take a look at the good news. You don't need to lose all of that weight to gain health benefits. Even if you lose 10 or 15 pounds, you can get big improvements in your health. For example, your blood glucose levels will fall if you lose that much weight. Your blood fat levels in your blood system will improve. Your blood pressure will generally improve significantly, and other health risks will go down. So we're talking about taking it in small steps. And even if it's losing 10 or 15 pounds to begin with, if you're overweight, that can make a big improvement in your health. So we can ask the question, what is a healthy weight? For the young adults, it might be the weight at which you look your best. A lot of importance put on looking good, especially when we're young, isn't it? And keeping a healthy weight is important for that. If you're an athlete, it might be the weight at which you perform the best. For years, I ran races, marathons, and 10K races, and so on. And you'll find that you don't find many winners that are excessively overweight. The people who have a healthy weight are the ones that are up there in the winning class. So maintaining a healthy weight improves your physical performance. But for everyone, and perhaps this is a little more, a better guide of what a healthy weight is for most of us, it's the weight for a given height that corresponds to the lowest mortality or morbidity. In other words, the lowest risk of dying or the lowest risk for specific diseases. And so let's look at some charts that kind of show that. Here's the BMI chart and mortality for men. And notice on the bottom of the chart, as we zoom in there, look at it a little closer, that's the BMIs listed along the bottom. As the BMIs are very low and they go to the high, we see that trend. As the weight gets up around 30, BMI of 30 and above, notice that the risk is already 44% increased risk of dying. If it's higher than that, the risk goes up twice or even 3 times the risk. And so a BMI less than 25 for most people is in the ideal range. But also, if you notice on the left side there, if they get excessively lean, the risk goes up too, doesn't it? 37% increase in mortality. So we don't want to be too skinny, we want to be in that healthy weight range. Usually a BMI around 20 to 25, or just under 25. For women, we see the same thing. The lowest mortality for people who have a BMI of 20 to 22, and 22 to 24.9, you notice right there is right on the 1. So the 20 to 25, or just under 25, lowest mortality. And it starts going up, and by the time I have a BMI of 30 and above, again, 44% increased risk of mortality. So a little bit overweight is not too much of a health problem, but as it gets up into the obese category, the health raises significantly. Now, some good news for those of us who are a little older. If the weight goes up a little as we age, not quite as big of a risk factor as in the younger years. And that's what we see in this chart here. It's a little bit difficult, but here we've got along the bottom of the chart the BMI, and the height of the bar represents the mortality rate from all causes. And you will notice that for each BMI, the lowest mortality, if you're over 70, is a BMI of 27. So being a little overweight, according to the standards for the younger people, is actually has some health advantage. And now notice that as you get thinner and leaner, as you get older, the risk is even higher than the person who is obese on the other side. So again, it's important to keep the weight in that healthy range. Being too lean is not good, and usually that reflects a low lean body mass, low muscle mass, and that significantly decreases our risk for survival. But staying in the healthy weight range, we do better, and in this case, obesity would be somewhere up around BMI of 35 and above for people in the age of 70 above. So here we just have it related to the age because it varies a little bit with age, and this was done by an insurance company who they're interested in how long people live. They have to do that because they have to figure out how long to send you bills for your life insurance. They want to make sure you live long enough, pay enough so that they cover their costs. And so they found out that people who live the longest, if you're in your 20s, a BMI of around 21.4 for men, and even a little under 20 for women. And then in the middle age, 40 to 49, notice about 22.9 for men, 23.2 for women. And then as you get up to 70, notice that 27 for men or even 27.8 for women was the ideal for living a longer life. So you'll find in your book, if you haven't already done this at the beginning of your program, there's at the very beginning in the Getting Started section, there's a little chart there that you can calculate your BMI and see how you're doing and compare yourself with those standards. Now let's take a look at some research that's been done on BMI and life expectancy. This is from the Journal of the American Medical Association. They simply took people and measured their BMI and then waited for many years to see how many died and what their mortality rates were. And actually this is life expectancy, how long they live. And what happens is as the BMI starts down there around 24, those people had the best longevity, didn't they? Average of about 78. That was probably taken at birth. And then as the BMI gets higher and higher, notice what happens to the life expectancy. It goes down and down. And then when you get into BMI for men of 45 and above, which is significantly overweight, there's a huge drop in mortality. So for good long life, keeping the weight in a healthy range is very important. For women, we see pretty much the same thing, don't we? As the BMI goes up, the life expectancy goes down. So the women will lose about 9 years of life in that highest risk category. Now let's look at some specific diseases and look at the different categories. Normal weight would be a BMI of less than 25. Overweight would be a BMI of between 25 and 30. The obese would be 30. and above, and very obese would be 35 or 40 and above. So notice as the weight goes up and the risk for diabetes, that's a big difference, isn't it? Big changes. So one of the most important things you can do for preventing diabetes is to keep that weight in a healthy range. How about high blood pressure? High blood pressure is one of the most common problems in our medical problems in our society today. Very, very common. And notice that here, if you look at normal weight, overweight, obese, and very obese, again, a huge change in blood pressure levels. So one of the best things you can do in maintaining a healthy blood pressure, which again is important for the heart and the brain and the eyes and the kidneys, all of those things are damaged by high blood pressure. Keeping the weight in a healthy range helps prevent those health problems. How about cholesterol levels? Notice here again, normal weight, overweight, and obese. Every time the weight goes up, what happens to the cholesterol in the blood? It goes up. And if the blood cholesterol levels goes up, what happens to the arteries in the heart and the arteries that go to the brain and so on? They're more likely to become clogged and plugged, aren't they? Circulation is impaired, so it relates to heart attack in particular. And then risk of arthritis. Same thing, isn't it? All of these charts show that as the weight goes up, the risk goes up. We don't have one for cancer, but it's also similar for cancer. So keeping the weight in that healthy range is a very positive thing we can do for good health. Another way to measure your health or your weight to see if it's in the healthy range is to do the girth measurement. How far around the middle. And if you take a cloth tape and put it around your waist about the level of the umbilicus, take a deep breath, relax, pull the tape snug but not too tight, and then measure your waist and see what it is. And then we have the norms, I think, in this next slide. People who have the best health and the best longevity, men is less than 37 inches and women less than 33. And doesn't get up into the high risk until you're men of 40 inches and above, or women 35 inches and above. That's the definition of obesity. And particularly, it's measuring obesity at the abdominal level. As it turns out, when you're looking at health risks, it's the fat that's stored in our abdomen, particularly the intra-abdominal fat, that is the most dangerous to our health. It affects things like the overall metabolism, the amount of cholesterol that goes into the bloodstream, the amount of glucose, our resistance to glucose or to insulin, so the glucose levels climb, all of those things, and the inflammation, all related to intra-abdominal fat. So that's one of the best measures. In fact, the waist girth measurement is even better risk indicator than your BMI. Well, let's take a look at some of the trends that's happening in our life and what is causing some of these problems of obesity. And here was an interesting study from JAMA where they looked at trends in eating and portion sizes. How big of a portion are typical foods that we eat? Notice they said in soft drinks, this is compared for several years back to current times, that our average soft drink now, almost 50 more calories per drink served. Well, those calories add up, don't they? Salty snacks now, as you compared to many years ago, 93 calories more per serving. They're just making bigger packaging and bigger soft drink bottles and so on, so that there's more per serving. French fries, 68 calories more than the average French fry servings back many years ago. These things, they all go up and they all contribute to those excess calories and weight, don't they? A hamburger now, 97 calories more per hamburger. And Mexican dishes over 100 calories. So if we eat the same number of servings that we used to long ago, we get more calories, and that contributes to the overweight. Another factor contributing to it is people eat out more now. Notice that about 35% of the calories, or about a third of all the calories we eat, comes from fast food and restaurant foods. And these meals tend to be higher in calories, also higher in saturated fats and sugar and salt and so on, the things that aren't good for us, and they also contribute to obesity. And then a third factor is snacks, things people just grab here and there to eat between meals. And snack calories have increased by about 73%, almost doubled. In other words, people are grabbing things here and there and eating them throughout the day, and it begins to add up, doesn't it? So that about 20% of all the calories the average person eats now just comes from snacking between meals. And probably cutting out snacking would have a lot to do with better health. Next one we'll take a look at is, what is the composition of the food? The fat or carbohydrate or the protein amount in the food, does that make a difference? We hear a lot about low carbohydrate eating now, and we hear a lot about eating more protein and more fats and a low carbohydrate diet. But let's look at what the research actually shows. And they studied 1,600 people, what they ate over many years, 10-year study, and they looked at the percent of calories that came from the different things. And if you zoom in on the chart here, we can see on the protein, the yellow is the high intake in that case, in protein. This is how much weight they gained. First of all, the blue is the low intake and the yellow is the high intake of protein, okay? And notice that the high intake in protein, when it was higher, they actually gained more weight. That's just the opposite of what you hear, isn't it? So when they're eating more protein, it didn't help them to lose weight, they actually gained weight. Probably the reason is because protein comes with a lot of fat, usually. You know, if it's cheese or if it's meat or a hamburger or a hot dog or whatever, it also has a lot of fat and calories. And so eating extra protein didn't help them to lose weight, they actually gained weight. Notice on carbohydrate, those who had a low intake of carbohydrate gained the most weight. And those who ate a little more carbohydrate didn't gain as much weight. Again, the opposite of what we hear today, isn't it? And of course, the kind of carbohydrate that's most helpful are the fresh fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains. Those are the kind of healthy carbohydrates. Eating more of those will actually help us not to gain excess weight. It's those refined carbohydrates that put on the weight. And then looking at fat, the blue again would be the low intake, and those who ate the most fat gained a little bit more, but not a lot of difference, wasn't it? So having more fat in the diet doesn't explain all of the excess fat we gain. Now let's go to the last one there, and that's fiber. And look at the amount of weight gained by the height of the bars. And those who had blue is a low intake of fiber, and the yellow is a high intake. And what do we see? Those who had the high intake of fiber had the lowest weight gain, and those who had the low fiber intake had the largest weight gain. Of all the things they looked at, fiber was the best predictor of weight gain. Isn't that interesting? So a high fiber diet is helpful in preventing weight gain. And it's something that Weight Watchers now, if you've gone to that weight control program, they emphasize, they give extra credit if you're eating more fiber in your diet. So here was their conclusion from that study. A low fiber intake predicted weight gain and other cardiovascular disease risk factors more strongly than did saturated fat, total fat, carbohydrate intake. Isn't that interesting? High fiber diets are protective against obesity, heart disease, and one way that they might do that is they help to keep insulin levels lower. Insulin, you know, encourages us to store fat and also blocks the ability of the body to burn up that fat. So high fiber diets help to lower our blood glucose levels, and if our blood glucose levels are lower, our insulin levels are lower, it seems to create an atmosphere for helping prevent weight gain. As we mentioned earlier, it's the refined foods. As you see a few examples there of the donuts. These refined foods that cause our blood sugar levels to go high, insulin levels to go higher, and they tend to be related to the weight gain. And that's what the next study shows. And I think this is one of the most interesting studies that's come out just recently here in the last year. And they looked at the amount of processed foods that people eat and weight gain. And it's a very interesting study. First of all, they took the subjects and they randomized them to eat either a highly processed diet for 2 weeks or unprocessed diet. In other words, foods that have been highly processed, manufactured foods we could call them or whatever, as opposed to the foods coming in their natural state like a potato or a carrot or a tomato. It's unprocessed. And they compared these two. And subjects were instructed for the 2 weeks to eat as much or as little as they desired. They put these foods on the table that people would eat, and then they would weigh them and see how much food they ate and determine how many calories. And here's what they found. Those eating the processed foods ate 508 more calories per day than those who were eating the unrefined foods, less processed. They also gained 2 more pounds on the processed diet. And when they ate the unprocessed foods, the more foods with higher fiber and less refining, they actually lost 2 pounds. So they concluded in their study, to prevent weight gain, choose primarily unprocessed foods. And I think this is probably one of the best research articles that's been done to show that if you really want to keep your weight down, it's the choice of our foods. Now here in this graph, you can actually see the results. The blue line is the ultra-processed foods and the number of calories over the 2 weeks, and you can see it quite a bit higher than the red line, which is the unprocessed foods, an average of 500 calories more per day. So that's pretty dramatic. And then when you put that into weight gain, even more dramatic, they all are showing the change in their weight and the number of days on the diet. And notice those eating the ultra-processed foods, what happened to their weight? It went up over time, didn't it? Those on the unprocessed foods went down. So a very important factor in keeping your weight under control. So what are ultra-processed foods? Well, highly processed foods, they're changed from their natural state. It doesn't look like a potato anymore. It might be a potato chip or a French fry or whatever. And as they do this process, things get added. Fats and other calories become added, and the food is absorbed maybe more quickly and that kind of thing. And it changes the way it's handled in the body. Highly processed foods usually have added sugars, fats, salts, and other additives, which usually are detrimental to our health. And they have many nutrients removed in the refining process. Vitamins are usually lower, minerals are lower, fiber is usually significantly lower. Probably one of the best examples of that is they take whole wheat and grind it, take off the bran, take out the germ, and what you have left is the endosperm or the starch. And that's highly refined. And when you eat it now, it's absorbed very quickly. It raises your blood sugar just as fast as almost pure starch. And yet 90% of the, as pure sugar I should say, but yet 90% of the grains eaten in the United States are made from these white flour products. And the cakes and the cookies and the pies and the biscuits and the rolls and the white bread and all of these things we make from that. And we change it and process it. It's absorbed more quickly. Our blood sugars go higher, the insulin levels go higher, and our body weights go higher. So we need to be careful to eat more less processed foods, more of the unprocessed foods. So on the other side of this chart, ultra-processed foods, it says, are the main source of calories. Almost 58% of the American diet comes from these kinds of foods that are ultra processed. And we also get more sugars from those foods and, of course, more calories. So here's a little chart that kind of helps us to identify it a little bit, give some examples. Unprocessed might be fresh corn. Do you like to eat corn on the cob? It's one of my favorite ways. That would be the unprocessed as you can get, isn't it? Then if you can it, well, what happens when they can it? Well, they usually add salt and they usually add a little sugar. And so the calories go up a little bit and makes it to be absorbed a little faster. Then the ultra-processed might be something like a corn chip, where it's ground real fine and it's deep fried and a lot more calories. And because it's been refined, it's absorbed very, very quickly. Again, corn chips are absorbed, the carbohydrate in it, almost as fast as pure sugar. So that's where we get into trouble. Let's take an apple, fresh apple, that's the unprocessed. If you make it into applesauce, that would be somewhat processed. And usually they of course refine it by mashing it all up, making it smaller, and so it's absorbed more quickly. It's not in the full state like the fresh apple is. And they also usually add sugar, don't they? And then if you take the ultra-processed, well, that might be the apple pie. And you can see the calories go up, and also the sugar goes up, and a lot of the refinement part of the food, so it's absorbed more quickly. Potato could be the unprocessed. You process it a little bit, maybe like when you have fried potatoes, and then we have the potato chips. And so the more processed it becomes, the more it's changed in the way the body handles it. The last one, we start with whole wheat. You might make it into wheat checks, which again usually has added sugar and salt. And it's also ground up in finer pieces, so it's absorbed more quickly. And then the ultra-processed would be the donut, the cake, the cookie, those kinds of things made from the white flour. So be careful of processed food. It's probably of all the things we've seen in research now, Eating too many processed foods might be the major explanation of why obesity is so common in the United States, because we eat so many of those foods. I might just go back to that slide. Here's a typical meal in a fast food restaurant. You see the hamburger and the white buns and the French fries and the Coke. Those are all highly processed, aren't they? I'm not sure if that's a chicken leg or what in that other picture there. Again, would be an example of more processed, wouldn't it? Now, compare that to the bottom, where you have fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains and so on in a natural state as which they're grown, and those are the healthiest. We don't gain weight on those foods. We gain weight on the upper ones. So let's take a minute and just look at some practical steps for maintaining a healthy weight. The best advice we have is, rather than trying to go on a weight loss program, we need to adopt a healthy lifestyle. Dieting doesn't work long term, does it? People go on a diet, they cut way back, they lose 5 or 10 pounds, and the diet is very restrictive, and they get tired of it, and they throw it out, and they go back and they eat the same as they always have done, and the weight comes right back again, doesn't it? Sometimes it's called yo-yo dieting. But what we need is something that we can do and change for a lifetime so that we maintain it the rest of our lives. So we need healthy eating habits, we need regular physical activity to help burn up the calories, and we need to be thinking also of good coping skills and behavior management techniques that help us to maintain this kind of a lifestyle, again, for our lifetime. So, number one is setting an achievable goal. Many times people will look at the charts and they say, oh, I have to lose 50 pounds. There's no way I'm ever going to do that. So what happens? They never start. So we need a realistic goal. And what's generally recommended is 5 to 10% of your weight, might be 5 or 10, 15 pounds. And that's something that's more realistic. That's something we can do in a matter of a few weeks, isn't it? So even losing this much weight, as we mentioned earlier, can significantly improve our health. Blood pressure, blood fat levels, cholesterol levels, insulin resistance, all of those things will improve. And how much should we lose per week? Again, you may see these signs that say, lose 10 pounds in 10 weeks. Well, I should say in 1 week. We had a sign on our street one time that says, lose 10 pounds in 1 week. Well, is that realistic? I don't think if you ate anything that week, you might not lose 10 pounds. You might become dehydrated and lose that much. But we need to do it more gradually. And by the way, if we take the pounds off too fast, what happens? We're either just dehydrating ourselves and losing water, which often happens, but we also may be losing muscle tissue. And sometimes we lose more muscle than fat tissue. Now, is that healthy for us? Not at all. We said earlier that the lean body weight, the muscle tissue, is a strong predictor of survivability. So we want to do it gradually. And if we do it gradually, a half a pound to a pound a week, then you can burn off the fat, but still maintain good, healthy diet and a good, healthy body composition. So, one of the good principles, of course, is to be active. Being active burns up calories. It helps us to keep our calorie balance in line. It's hard if we just try to cut back on the diet all the time. If we're more active, we can eat a little more without gaining the weight. And so physical activity is very important. It burns calories, but notice there too, it reduces your risk of diabetes, heart problems, and certain cancers. Even if you don't lose the weight, you still get health benefits from the exercise. So it's good to always build it in every program. And notice that last statement there, physical activity counteracts many of the health problems linked to excess fat. As your fat level goes up, your blood pressure goes up. As you exercise, your blood pressure goes down. As you get overweight, your blood glucose goes up. As you exercise, your glucose comes down. Same with cholesterol. Everything that fat does to you, excess body fat, it seems that exercise is almost like an antidote for that. So exercise has a lot of benefit. And sometimes I tell people, if you can't get skinny, at least get fit, because you'll get big improvements in your health. And we'll take a look at those studies here in just a moment. First of all, let's look at how many calories you burn in exercise. On the right-hand side in this chart, you will see the increase in your metabolism, or the number of calories you burn per hour. We call those METs. They're multiples of resting metabolism. So when you're sitting quietly, kind of like I am here, we call that a 1 MET. So that's a 1X, or 1 MET activity. Then if you're doing calisthenics and you measure the amount of calories the person burns during that time, notice they burn 3 to 8 times as many calories as when you're just sitting relaxed. Those are big differences, aren't they? Or if you're climbing hills, 5 to 10 times as many calories per hour. Or biking, you can look down through the list there, and 7 times as much. Walking 3 to 4 miles an hour, 3 to 4.5 times as many calories as sitting. The only problem is we do more time sitting than we do walking, don't we? And so we don't burn as many calories. So whatever it is, look at there running. If you're a runner, 9 minutes per mile, that's a moderate pace. 11 times as many calories per minute. So I know when I was running in the marathons and things in years past, I didn't have any trouble maintaining my weight. I could eat whatever I wanted and I didn't have to worry about it. Now that I'm a little older and I'm not able to run as much, I do have to be more careful. So I do my walking, I do my biking, things that I can do. But physical activity burns a lot of calories and lowers our risk. So keep that in mind. Calories burn off, exercise burns off excess calories. Number 2, as you exercise, you burn off particularly the intra-abdominal fat in the abdomen, which we mentioned earlier is so damaging to our health. So here's a study. If we look a little closer, you can see there's 4 groups of people on the bottom there. There were controls. They didn't change their activity level. Then there's those who took up low activities for a year, those who had moderate activities for a year, and those who had high activities for a year, and they look at the change in body fat. Now notice in the low activity, there's a little bit of the yellow fat that is burned, and yellow is showing total body fat. That's the fat over our whole body. It's under the skin and so on. But the red is the intra-abdominal fat, that part right here in the middle that is so damaging to our health. And notice, what kind of fat did they burn the most? The intra-abdominal fat, mostly, wasn't it? And if they did moderate exercises a little bit more, they burn a little bit of both, but still burn primarily the intra-abdominal fat. And even in the high activity, they're still burning more calories from both groups, but still burning the most fat from that intra-abdominal fat. That's why you don't have to lose a whole lot of weight, especially if you're doing it through exercise along with healthy eating, to get the good health benefits from losing 10 or 15 pounds of weight. It burns that dangerous fat. So here's a very interesting study. 25,000 people over 10 years, and they monitored what happened to their weight over those years and looked at their mortality from any cause. Now, first of all, let's look at the blue charts. Those are the people who are unfit. They're not exercising regularly. By the way, notice how much higher their mortality is than the people who exercise regularly, over twice as likely to die during that 10-year period from being fit to not being fit. So that's a big difference. But let's just track the blue ones. So here's the normal weight risk, the overweight, and the obese. And what happens to those blue charts? As their weight goes up, their risk of dying climbs, doesn't it? Significantly. A 50% increase in mortality. Now, let's take the people who are exercising regularly. They're highly fit. That's the yellow group down there. And notice from the normal weight to the overweight to the obese, what happens to their mortality? There's very little change, is there? It doesn't go up very much at all. Practically not at all. As you exercise, as we said earlier, it's almost like an antidote to the bad things that excess weight does for us. So again, helps us to understand that little phrase, if you can't get skinny, at least get fit. Because as you get fit, your risk drops significantly. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the good news, isn't it? Because not everybody can get skinny, but we all can exercise and improve our fitness level, can't we? Now, along the next road is, of course, choose healthy foods. To lose weight, of course, we need foods to eat more foods that are lower in calories, less refined, as we talked about earlier. It's good to eat them at regular meals and be careful of the snacking between meals because we can add a lot of extra calories that way. We need to watch the portion size. In other words, don't put so much on our plates. And then, of course, limiting the fast foods and the restaurant foods because those tend to increase our body weight. So those are the things we're looking at for eating-wise. When we're talking about lower calorie foods, here's what we're talking about. Fresh fruits, a fresh apple, a fresh peach, strawberries, blueberries, packed with nutrients, antioxidants, all kinds of phytochemicals that are important for our good health, but not very many calories. Vegetables and salads, again, another thing to load up on, very low in calories. Be careful of the salad dressing, higher in calories, but these vegetables and salads, those are the lowest in calories of any group of food, and also some of the highest in some of the nutrients. If you use dairy, try to use the non-fat dairy. In every glass of whole milk, there's a pat and a half of butter, just about doubles the calories. If you take that out, you lose a lot of cholesterol, and that's saturated fat, but the protein and the calcium, everything your body needs is still in that, so the low-fat dairy would be healthier. Or you might want to use soy milk, and if you use soy milk as an alternative, look for the ones that are sugar-free. You don't need the ones that add a lot of sugar. That's just adding calories that's going to add to our weight gain again. And then things like a bowl of lentils in place of a hamburger or a hot dog or some other food that has a lot of extra calories. There's good protein in the lentils. They're very high in fiber, and they're absorbed very slowly and very healthy for us. Also, of course, the whole wheat bread, very high in fiber, and so it slows absorption. That's better. Oatmeal, again, very high in fiber, particularly the kind of fiber that helps to lower cholesterol levels and slows the absorption of glucose, so it helps prevent diabetes and so on. Same with brown rice. These are all healthy grains. These are the kinds of foods we need to be eating more of. Now here we see a very interesting study. A large number of people, 133,000 people, and over 24 years. You'd seldom see a study that goes that long. And they looked at specific foods, and they looked to see if they ate more of those foods, did it cause them to gain weight or to lose weight. So let's look at the chart there. And you see the foods listed along the bottom. And on the left-hand side, you see starting out with 0, in other words, where they started with their weight. Then over those 24 years, did they gain weight, which would be a positive in the up direction, or did they lose weight, which would be negative or in the lower direction? Notice those who had a high fruit intake, that they actually lost weight during those 24 years. Those who ate a lot of vegetables, they didn't gain weight, they actually lost a little. Notice those who ate the most berries, again, didn't gain weight, they actually lost a little. And look at cauliflower there, that's kind of interesting. Do you like cauliflower? Very low in calories. I like it steamed along with broccoli, and eat the two together. The people who ate a lot of those kind of foods, they lost the most weight during those 24 years. Isn't that interesting? And also, don't have it on the chart, but notice it's on the left, people who had a lot of tofu and soy products as opposed to a lot of higher calorie red meat products also lost about 2.5 pounds on the average during those 24 years. Now, the two foods that were related to weight gain, what were those? Potatoes and corn. Some of the starchy foods. And so we have to be careful of that. I love potatoes, but have to be careful not to eat too many. Potatoes happen to be one food in the vegetable kingdom. When they're eaten, because they're mostly starch, they raise your blood sugars very quickly. And again, that would raise insulin and tend to store those calories as fat. So be careful not to eat too many potatoes. And then the corn. I suppose that's more corn chips and those kinds of things, where they're highly refined, ultra-refined, and it tends to put the weight on. It's interesting, too, when they want to fatten up the cattle in the cattle industry, what do they feed them? Feed them a lot of corn, don't they? And so a little bit of corn, especially if you eat it on the cob, probably okay, but be careful, especially if it's refined, made it into chips and so on. So that kind of brings us to our next principle, limiting refined calorie foods and snack foods. And you can see the list there, the soda pop, be 150 calories or more per drink. Snack foods, very easy. If you see the snack crackers, and they make such big packages now when you buy them, and you look on the back, there might be 200, 300, 400 calories in one of those snack packs of chips. Cookies, candies and sweets, all of those kinds of things, and especially desserts, very high in sugar and fats and calories that add up. So we have to be careful of those kinds of foods, don't we? So we need to limit those. And if you really do need a snack, if you're really hungry and you need to eat something and you don't have time for the meal, notice the picture on the right. Those are healthy snacks, aren't they? Some fresh grapes, some fresh tomatoes, carrot sticks, a fresh orange or an apple. Those are foods that are low in calories, high in nutrition, and also high in fiber. And so if you must snack, those would be much better than those others, wouldn't it? Another good principle is to limit foods high in saturated fat. We know that saturated fats raise their cholesterol levels, which raises the risk for heart disease and so on. So that's a good category of foods we just need to cut down on anyway. We find that largely in the fast foods, don't we? And a lot of the fried foods, such as French fries and onion rings and chicken nuggets and all of those deep fried foods. And of course the fatty meats, the hamburgers, the hot dogs, the bacon, sausage, fried chicken, all of those things very high in calories and high in saturated fat. And also the things like the cream sauces and the gravies, a lot of fat and calories in there. We talked about the whole milk and the high-fat dairy, so be careful of that. If you get the yogurt, try to get the low-fat yogurt. And then, of course, things like ice cream, cheese, sour cream, cream cheese, very high in fat. And if you eat those foods at all, keep them in very small doses and not very often. So cutting back on those foods. You can see the big pizza there with a lot of cheese and a lot of meat and things on it, very high in saturated fat, and presents a lot of calories, and not what you would call a weight loss food, is it? Now, another principle, watch the portion size and also second helpings. How much do we put on our plate? What is a serving? You can see serving size is listed there. And on the foods as you buy them on the package, they also usually list the serving size, and they show the number of calories per serving size and so on. So be careful about how much we eat of some of those foods. One of the things that helps on portion size that I do sometimes, you know they make big plates. And if you go on a cruise, they not only have big plates, they have big platters. Maybe you've noticed that. You can put a lot of food on those platters. Well, that's the opposite of what we want to do. You have a little smaller plate where you can keep the portion sizes a little smaller, and it helps you sometimes to eat less by keeping the portion sizes down. And then be careful of the seconds. Sometimes it's easy to have seconds and thirds, and that, of course, adds up to our calories. So we need to be careful of that. One thing that can kind of help prevent the seconds is to learn to eat slowly. You know, it takes time for our body to register the foods that we're eating. And if you finish your meal and you feel still hungry, try waiting 10 or 15 minutes and see if you don't feel satisfied by that time. If 15 minutes later you're still real hungry, well, go ahead and eat a little more. But usually it just takes time for the foods we eat, and the foods we eat actually produce substances that get in the blood and go up to the brain, and they reach certain areas of the brain that says you have been fed. You shouldn't be hungry anymore. There's hormones that do that. And those hormones, leptin is one of them, that says you have been fed, you don't need to be eating anymore. It gives satiety. But that takes time. And so allow a little time to do that. Sometimes people say when you're eating, just take a bite or two and lay your fork down and you know, take time to chew it and don't be in a rush. And if you do, you will eat less and you'll feel more satisfied at the end. There's also some other foods that help satiety. One is fiber, and it does that primarily by keeping the blood sugar levels lower so that the insulin levels don't go so high, because when they go very high, they drop your blood sugar levels way down till you actually get into the hypoglycemic area. You get very hungry and you want to eat more. And so choosing low glycemic foods, foods high in fiber help that. Protein foods are also low glycemic foods, and they provide satiety. Just make sure they're healthy proteins. And then the idea of making mealtime social. So oftentimes we just grab food on the run, don't we? But if we have a nice meal, we sit down, if it's warm food, we have a good time visiting together as we eat, take our time, make it a social time too. It's a healthy way to make the meal more satisfying, and we're less likely to want to just keep eating when we keep grabbing food here and grabbing food there. It is less satisfying. Avoiding snacking between meals, we talked about that, and you can see in the picture there some typical snacks, and they begin to add up quickly, don't they? Someone has figured out that if you eat just 10 extra calories a day, that will add up to an additional pound of fat in 1 year. It's what we do consistently, isn't it? So be careful. We just want to take a little bite here, a little bite there, but it adds up. So let's be careful about the between meal eating. And how about the late night eating? That can be a bad habit to get into, isn't it? And we find out that if you eat late at night for a long period of time, you get into that habit so that every night you feel hungry later on. You think you need to eat again, but it's mostly just a habit. And if you can develop regular meal times and not eating late at night, pretty soon that becomes a habit. You don't feel hungry later on, and you don't eat those extra calories. Just think about it for a moment. When you go to bed, and if you've eaten a big heavy meal late at night, we don't sleep well, do we? The food kind of tends to come up a little bit, and we get a little bit of GERD, and it's uncomfortable, and we toss and we turn. And the research is very clear that if you'll sleep much better if your food is pretty well digested out of your stomach when you go to bed. If you've got a lot of food there, we won't sleep well. And if you don't sleep well, then the next day we're a little more grouchy, and maybe we have a tendency to eat other unhealthy foods the next day. So it kind of gets into a pattern. Also think about it, all those calories in your stomach when we're at night sleeping, where are those calories going to go? We're not going to burn them up, are they? They got to go somewhere. They just don't evaporate into the thin air, do they? So they go to fat storage. If we're active during the day and we have some calories and we're physically active, we burn up some of those calories, don't we? So don't fill up your gas tank and then go to bed. Otherwise, it will turn into fat around our middle. People who don't get enough sleep are also much more likely to gain weight. And research has shown this in a number of studies. Getting extra sleep or getting the amount of sleep you need every day helps the body to function better, actually changes the hormones in the body so that if you don't get enough sleep, so that you feel like you're hungry and you need to eat more. So getting enough sleep is important. Also, if you're not getting enough sleep and you're kind of tired, like this poor fellow on the stationary bicycle, you don't feel like exercising, do you? You feel more like a nap. So getting your sleep, a good strategy for maintaining our weight. And then following a healthy eating plan. That can be very helpful. And in your book, as you go through, there will be several healthy eating plans that are listed there that you can follow, including this one. This is from Harvard. They have a healthy eating plate, and it talks about, half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables, and then a whole grain, and then a healthy protein, and drinking water instead of a lot of the soft drinks and so on, and then being active all day. It's just a simple little way to kind of keep in your mind, here's what I need to do to be eating healthfully. And you'll also find there's the DASH diet. You can Google that and come up with, this is by the National Institutes of Health. They have the DASH diet, which is a calorie-controlled eating plan that's very healthy, that can help you to follow a plan if you need to lose weight by going on a calorie-controlled eating plan. Also in the booklet, you will find a calorie-controlled eating plan that is very similar to the DASH diet. You can follow that. So having a healthy eating plan helps us then in planning our meals so that we'll choose them more carefully, such as the ChooseMyPlate.gov recommendation again, choosing more low-calorie foods and whole grain and high-fiber foods to keep our diet healthy. So let's just do a summary on eating. The foods we want to limit are the fatty meats, the whole milk, cheese and cream, the high-calorie foods, high in saturated fats. Limit the pastry and the deep-fried foods and the snacks. Limit most desserts, ice cream, pie, cake, candy, and soda pop. They can add those calories up in a hurry, can't they? And they also raise our blood sugar and our insulin levels quickly. We need to watch the serving sizes. Take a little smaller sizes. Try to avoid the second helpings if we can. Limit eating out. The more we eat out, it tends to be that we eat too many calories. So watch that. Have more home meals. And of course, limiting the late snacking. Better not to eat anything after 7 o'clock at night. You'll get better sleep and your weight will be lower. The things we need to increase. There are some things we need to eat more of, perhaps. More fresh fruits and vegetables. Soy, we saw, and other legumes. Very good sources of protein, but are lower in calories, generally. Whole grains, they're high in the fiber. We use those in place of the refined cereals. High fiber foods, and any of the lower calorie foods, like the salads and vegetable soup and some of those kinds of things. Eat more of those kind of things. They tend to fill us up before we get too many calories. And of course, water. You can have all the water we want. There's no calories in water. And it's good to drink an extra water because sometimes if we're dehydrated, we may need to think we need to drink soda pop or something. But getting the water is a much better way to do it, isn't it? And then, of course, increase our physical activity. As we do that, we burn up more calories. Now, just a couple of thoughts about behavior change techniques, things that help us in maintaining our weight. Develop a strong system of social support. If we talk to our buddy, if we talk to people in our family, explain what we're trying to do, get people to help us as we're doing that, because the social support is very helpful in maintaining long-time goals that we're working towards. Avoiding cues or triggers to overeat. If you have a hard time resisting candy, don't put it on the places where you see it all the time. Get it out of the house, get it out of sight. Whatever else it is, if you don't see it, you may not think about it eating it. So watch what you have stored in the house. And we can develop problem-solving skills in relation to eating and to exercise. If we have a hard time exercising, talk to your buddy, work out some problems. What can I do? Solve those problems. Talk to people who are successful at that. They may have some suggestions for you. And of course, self-monitoring. You may even want to write down what you eat. The research shows that people, if they're really serious about losing weight, if they write down everything they eat and keep a record of it, much more likely to lose weight than people that just say, well, I'll just keep it in my mind. They tend to forget how much they're eating. Something about keeping track. There are some self-monitoring systems in the book you can use if you like. Also, just weighing ourselves regularly. It helps us to see, is my trend going up? Am I maintaining? Am I going down? If I'm going up, what do I need to do? Well, I need to be more careful, get more exercise, eat a little less. And then, of course, changing our thinking. Self-defeating thoughts. Some people say, I'm just going to be fat. My mother was fat. My father was fat. Nothing I can do about it. And we give up. But it's really not so much, inheritance does have some effect on things, but it's primarily what we choose to do ourselves, isn't it? And we can change our eating habits. We can become more active. We can be able to make positive changes that can improve our health. It also helps if you have support from the spouses. So if the husband and the wife are both working together, the family as a whole trying to eat more healthily, lower calorie foods and so on, much easier than trying to do it if just one person in the family does it. And as we mentioned, keeping written records. I like to keep a track of my weight. I write it down on my calendar every day. I've been doing that for about 30 years. If I see it going up, that alarms me right away. Hey, I'm doing something wrong. I better begin making changes. And a daily exercise log, the same thing. I have goals of how many steps I want to take per day, how many miles I want to cover, how many minutes of exercise. And I jot those on my calendar every day, and it just keeps it in my mind. If you're keeping a food diary, sometimes that can be helpful too. And then sometimes reward your progress. If you reach your goal, you've lost certain pounds or something, take a special vacation, do something special, buy a new dress, new set of walking shoes, running shoes, whatever it is, and have goals that you work towards and reward yourselves on that. Also, when you're thinking long term, it's good and important to have good coping skills and to have a positive outlook. Because overeating often takes place when you're discouraged, you're upset, you've had a problem, and you say, oh, phooey, I'm just going to do what I want, and then you binge out on something. So we have to be careful that we keep our emotional health in a balanced state too, don't we? Plan time to relax and have fun every day. It's an important part of life anyway. Don't cut that part out. Keep stress at a manageable limit. Don't get yourself all stressed out and try to do more than you can possibly do. Be nice to yourself. Don't be critical, self-critical. Don't be your own self-enemy by putting yourself down all the time, but be nice to yourself. And don't focus on your failures. And we all make mistakes, but look forward to what we can do better. And of course, keep a positive, can-do mental attitude. And if we stay persistent and keep thinking positive, we can begin to make changes that'll have good results long term. And lastly, spiritual resources. If you're a spiritual person, why not take these things and issue to prayer in God? And He can help us through our spiritual resources to have the desire and the courage to face some of these issues and do them. And I like that verse in Matthew 19:26. It says, Jesus looked at them intently and said, humanly speaking, it's impossible. But with God, what? Everything is possible, isn't it? So use your spiritual resources to help you on any lifestyle change that you're making, because that's what God wants for you, is your best life possible anyway. So, a lifetime weight control, and here's a quote that came from a research that had been done on this. It says, for long-term success, keep in mind that you're not dieting, but you're developing a healthy lifestyle you can maintain for a lifetime. And then you will have success in managing the weight. And if you need further help, you can of course talk to your doctor, to a dietitian, to a weight trainer, join a weight support group, and get more support. So just in summary again, a healthy diet, low in calories, combined with increased physical activity, looking at behavior things, keeping our emotions and our stress levels moderate, and group support provide the best chance for permanent weight control. So, our little quiz, just to remind us on some things. About 2 out of 3 adults is overweight. Is that right? It's true. 2 out of 3. 67% of our population. Excess weight is closely related to which 3 major risk factors? You remember those? If you're overweight, you're more likely to have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high blood glucose levels. 3 very dangerous risk factors that cut life short for many people. Number 3, true or false, obesity increases healthcare costs an average of about $600 per person per year. Well, we didn't actually mention that in this talk, did we? But that's true. People who are overweight have significantly higher medical care costs. I run these weight management programs for a lot of corporations, and we can show that as people lose the weight and get healthier, their healthcare costs come down. It's a saving both to them, for their insurance company, and for the corporations. Now, measuring our waist. A waist girth or circumference of blank inches for men and blank inches for women indicates high risk or obesity. Remember those standards? Just a very simple test. You can do it in a matter of a few seconds. Men, if it's over 40 inches, women, if it's over 35 inches, you're in the high risk category. You need to make significant changes. Number 5, true or false, 25% of calories eaten today are from restaurant foods. Actually, that's false, isn't it? What was it? It's 35% of our calories come from restaurant foods. And usually that can contribute to overeating. Number 6, a realistic starting loss goal, weight to lose in pounds. How much is recommended? 10 to 15 pounds. And you can usually lose that in 10 to 15 weeks. And then if you want to stabilize your weight, and then if you want to go ahead and do that again, you can do it again, but put it in small steps that you can achieve so the goal doesn't look impossible. 7, the kind of body fat that increases risk the most is right here in the front, right in the middle, right in the intra-abdominal fat. That's why that measurement around the middle is so good, as it measures your risk very quickly. Number 8, true or false, being fit reduces most of the risk linked to being overweight. We saw 2 studies on that, didn't we? And as people are fit, it reduces the risk for most of the things that overweight increases our risk for. So again, if you can't get skinny, get fit, and most of your risks will come down. Number 9, half of my plate food guide should be what? Half of every plate that we eat should be fruits and vegetables, low-calorie foods, including salads. So think about that when you're eating. Are you getting those low-calorie foods which fill us up again before we get too many calories? And the last one there, the best approach to permanent weight loss is what? Well, the best approach is a lifestyle approach, isn't it? Not dieting. Something that you can do and achieve your healthy weight for a lifetime. So this week's assignments, of course, read the chapter in the little book, review what we've talked about today. It has a lot of other suggestions and tables and things to look at as you go through. If you want to, you can choose the low-calorie foods this week. And if you cut 300 to 500 calories from your diet daily, you will lose that half to 1 pound a week. And follow a healthy eating plan, as we've talked about, like the Choose My Plate or the DASH diet. And number 4, be active. Try to burn at least 30 to 60 minutes a day in your exercise program, burning calories during that time. That'll significantly help us to gain our healthy weight goal. So those are some things you can read in your book where you're tracking, where you can write these things down and so on. There will be other little suggestions to try during the week, just little things that might help. Give them all a try. They all can be beneficial and help you in manage your weight for a lifetime. Thank you. We'll see you next week.